So, we're running it back once again. I'm back at it with another video here being recorded on Friday, March 25th. Again, for the umpteenth time, I'm going on a trip, so I have to pre-record some stuff. Let's go over on to 32 Thoughts for, I believe, the third time already, and highlight what it is that Friedman has talked about when it comes to post-trade deadline material. This is the article on Sportsnet, 32 Thoughts, Evgeny Dadonov and the Trade Deadline Fallout, published on March 23rd. The link will be in the description as always. What we're going over here is the Montreal Canadiens and what else was on the table for Artturi Lehkonen. This is because Lehkonen was traded over to the Colorado Avalanche in a trade that I'm going to go out there and say was an absolute win for the Habs. We already made our video talking about Justin Barron. I keep on saying Barron. It's not Barron, it's Barron. Justin Barron and what kind of prospect he is, how I think he can help out the Canadiens. Long story short, he's a very good one. And when it comes to the point where Sidney Crosby is talking in the media about how the Avalanche made a mistake trading this guy away, I think you have to give some props to Kent Hughes for prying away this kind of player. Now, before we get into it, I wanted to just highlight it right here. If you want the status update on Artturi Lehkonen himself, at the time of me recording this audio, Friday, March 25th, he actually hasn't played for the Avalanche yet. It's been almost a week since the trade deadline, and there are still visa issues for this guy for... I don't know. I mean, I'm no lawyer or whatever, so I really don't know what's going on. Probably something to do with the legality of having an international player have employment in Colorado, something like that. I'm not really too sure how it works. If anybody wants to go in the comment section and explain the legalities behind that, then please go ahead and do so. But we are revisiting that trade, which saw the Montreal Canadiens send over Artturi Lehkonen and his expiring $2.3 million AAV with salary retained to the Colorado Avalanche in exchange for Justin Barron and a second-round pick. I get it, Artturi Lehkonen is a very good player. 50% of the salary was retained, so the only amount on the payroll for Colorado is $1.15 million, but Lehkonen for a very good prospect and a second sounds great to me. This is what Elliotte Friedman wrote about in his recent 32 Thoughts piece. Edmonton liked Artturi Lehkonen too, but they could not pay the same price as Colorado. That's it. That's the thought. It's a small one, and there isn't really any other implications here. It's just, hey, Edmonton liked this guy, but they couldn't pay the same price. What I wanted to do in this video is go over Edmonton, the moves they made, how it contrasts to the moves that the Colorado Avalanche made, and if you really wanted to say, here's the price that Colorado paid, let's try to match that up with the Oilers, what would your conclusion be? So, firstly, the Colorado Avalanche did indeed have themselves the asset to make this trade, it's why they got it done, but the Avalanche also made a few other trades that I found interesting as well. The other trade they made on trade deadline day was for another speedy, versatile forward. This time it's Andrew Cogliano from the San Jose Sharks. They gave up a 5th-round pick for Cogliano with 50% salary retained, and therefore are only going to be paying him $500,000 on the payroll. These are the only two moves they did on that day. If you want to include the other moves they had done a week beforehand, okay, there was the Nico Sturm for Tyson Jost swap, which saw them freeing up $1.275 million in salary. They also traded for Josh Manson from the Anaheim Ducks, so there you go, that's another big move that they did. But the Colorado Avalanche had some assets, and they had themselves the opportunity to shell those away for depth forwards. This is a team that's going to go out there and try to go all in the postseason, and if they come up short, it would be kind of seen as a failure in many people's eyes. I'm sort of starting to feel like Colorado is a team that, if they don't make the third round sooner rather than later, I really start to question the effectiveness of how this core is going to get it done into the next few playoff runs. But that's neither here nor there. If I had to place a bet, I'd probably say Colorado is good enough to make the third round. I'd just be pretty surprised if they didn't at this point. Meanwhile, the Edmonton Oilers had themselves a very interesting trade deadline themselves. They had two trades done. One was with the Canadiens. It was the Brett Kulak deal, trading away William Legason, a second-round pick, and a seventh-round pick. They also traded away a fourth-round pick for Derek Brassard from the Flyers. Now this right here, this Brassard trade, this was their forward trade, quote-unquote. Them acquiring a guy that can be a versatile player in their lineup, etc., 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 right? The only assets they gave up on the trade deadline were that William Legason, a second, a fourth, and a seventh. The Edmonton Oilers did not trade for a goaltender. They did not trade for a big-name defenseman. The best they could get was Kulak, and granted, Kulak has been pretty good so far, so good for him. But we did see some comments from Ken Holland afterwards saying that the Oilers were just not in a position to add an expensive goaltender or another expensive player to their cap hit. And so when you think about Artturi Lehkonen and the price that he fetched, a second and a very valuable prospect, you try to ask yourself, if the Oilers went out there and tried to make this move, if they tried to match Colorado for that Lehkonen price, what would their deal have looked like? Edmonton is an interesting team right now. You take a look at the draft picks they do have. If you're only looking at seconds, their seconds are in a pretty interesting spot. They do have a 2024 second-round pick, which is available. It's there. It exists. But for 2023 and 2022, it's kind of difficult to explain. So the 2022 second the Oilers have has itself a clause with the Chicago Blackhawks for that Caleb Jones-Duncan Keith trade. It was this one back then. The 2022 third was sent over on July 12, 2021. If the Oilers make it to the 2022 Stanley Cup Finals and Keith is in the top 4 of playoff time on ice for Oilers defensemen during the first 3 rounds, the pick upgrades to their 2022 second, and then that same pick, the conditional one, was sent over to the Oilers in the Kulak trade. If the Oilers reach the Stanley Cup Final, Montreal will receive Edmonton's 2023 second-round pick instead, pretty much because if the Oilers don't make the Finals this season, that third-round pick over to Chicago from a year ago stays as a third-round pick, and then the second will go over to Montreal. So it's strange, but it is what it is. If this is the case, which is more likely than not, I don't know if the Oilers will find themselves in the Finals, but if they don't, then that makes my job a little bit easier. You're going to have a 2023 second-round pick available. There would be that option to try go ahead and do that, but it would be sort of counterintuitive, right? Like, if you try to trade away a 2023 second off the implication that you feel like you're not going to have to give up that 2023 second because you don't feel like you're going to be able to make the Finals, what's the point of trading for an Artturi Lehkonen? Do you get what I'm saying right here? Should the Oilers have gone out there and thought about it, that 2023 second-round pick should have been untouchable in this situation because the conditions attached to it are all on the clause of them making the Stanley Cup Finals, and the trade with Artturi Lehkonen would have been with the intention of making the Finals. So it doesn't really make sense. They should have just touched their 2024 second-round pick, but then again, because we're hearing from a lot of NHL insiders that teams are more likely to ask for 2023 picks rather than 2022 picks, it would make a little bit more sense to me if Montreal was just like, no, we don't care about your 2024 pick. We just want the 2023 one or the 2022 one, which they already got in the Kulak trade, but there is a condition it might go over to 2023, yada, yada, yada. Furthermore, there is another thing that we can talk about when it comes to this Artturi Lehkonen Colorado trade price being matched. Justin Barron. Barron, to me, is a top 4 potential prospect as a right-handed defenseman. Who do the Edmonton Oilers have in their system that are right-handed defensemen and that do have top 4 ceilings that they have not fulfilled yet? You could say Evan Bouchard, but I think he's sort of already in that position, so he doesn't really count anymore. And then what? You go back into the Oilers and their draft history over the past few seasons, and you see a few names that do stand out. Of course, Philip Broberg is there, but he is a left-handed defenseman, doesn't really count. You have Dmitry Samorukov, who is a left-handed defenseman in the AHL. You have Luka Munzenberger, who was infamously involved in the swap for the Jesper Wallstedt draft pick. You have Philip Berglund as well. Long story short, you don't have any defenseman prospects that are of the caliber of a Justin Barron. In fact, you don't have too many prospects in general that are that valuable outside of the forwards Dylan Holloway, Carter Savoy, and Xavier Bourgault. The Montreal Canadiens, though, have more reasons than one to focus on the defense than those other forwards, because, I mean, we talked about this in the Barron video, but Montreal's right-hand defenseman prospect system is sort of weak compared to every other forward position and defense position they have. It was pretty much only Logan Mailloux, and so Justin Barron coming in here, acting as another guy to bolster that aspect of the roster, it's a really important acquisition here. And Edmonton, unfortunately, just does not have the necessary assets to make that trade. And so when Friedman writes in 32 Thoughts that Edmonton just could not match what it was that Colorado had to offer, unless you're thinking about trading away Evan Bouchard, which the Oilers very clearly should not be thinking about, I understand what Friedman is talking about. The second-round pick is already in muddy water because of all the conditions placed onto their future seconds with the Caleb Jones, Duncan Keith, and Brett Kulak trades, and then the right-handed defenseman top 4 potential prospect does not exist in the Edmonton system, as it did with Justin Barron in Colorado. So, talk to me in the comments all your thoughts about the Oilers trying to trade for Lehkonen but not having the necessary assets to do so. I was initially doubting the idea of them not having the assets because, it's just a second-round pick and a prospect. What more could you ask for? But then, looking at the entire status quo of this team, yeah, I could totally understand why they don't have a second-round pick and a top-4 right-handed defenseman prospect at their disposal. Let me know in the comments all your thoughts. If you're an Oilers fan, what would you want to have seen out of this team when it comes to the idea of trading for a Lehkonen? Are you okay that you didn't get this guy? Are you fine with Derek Brassard? I personally think Lehkonen is more valuable, but it's your call at the end of the day. Talk to me in the comments all your thoughts about the Oilers and the situation. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.